Hi everybody and welcome to BPD Update. I'm Chief Steve Strand of the Bremerton Police Department and welcome to the show. If you've seen the show before, you know that this is all about letting you know what we're doing around the Bremerton Police Department, how we serve you in the Bremerton community, and some specific topics that hopefully are going to help you out in terms of preventing crime and handling it if something happens in your neighborhood. And as we always do in the second half of the show, we will talk a little bit about our statistics and our numbers, as well as some important cases and a couple trends around the police department. Our guest for the first half of the show is Detective Marty Garland, works for the Bremerton Police Department, a veteran detective with our agency, and we're going to talk a little bit about something called Report It, which is sort of an updated version, if you go back as long as I do, an updated version of what we used to call Operation ID way back in the day. First of all, welcome, Marty.
Thank you.
Report It, people may have heard about this, they may not have, but really it has to do with property crime. You may have seen on the news that Washington State has relatively low violent crime rankings nationally. You know, it's a relatively safe state. Again, it's all relative. But we have a very high rate of property crime, unfortunately, in this state for a number of reasons, one of which is we don't have a lot of prison space or jail space, and a lot of the people that are committing property crime are out on the streets. Editorial comment from your chief. But as you know as well, in Bremerton, we focus on frequent flyers, which are often property offenders. So in other words, they're stealing stuff all over town. They're stealing our stuff, your stuff. And how do we get better at both catching them and stopping it and getting property back? And that's what Report It is all about. So Detective Garland, what is Report It? How does it work?
Well, before we address Report It, maybe we'll address what's called Leads Online, which is a national database that the Bremerton Police Department participates in. And it's basically an investigative resource that we're able to use to find items that have been sold, pawned at pawn shops, and then recover those items if they're stolen. All of the pawn brokers or secondhand stores in Washington State are required by law to report all the items that they handle to the local police department. And this is our database that then tracks those items so that we can compare serial numbers or descriptions and recover items that are stolen. Report It is a service that's offered by Leads Online for the citizens to use to track your own items before they've been stolen. So if I were to ask those in our audience today, how many of you know what the serial number for your iPod or your TV or your computer is, I would guess that probably 5% or less of us would have that written down somewhere.
And once something is stolen, then they say, I should have written it down, but I didn't.
Exactly. Right. And I would venture a guess to say that probably 10% or less even of our police officers would be able to track that information. What Report It is a database that's online, and you sign in under your own created user account, and you're able then to log items in your home that you already own by serial number and or description, and you're also able to include some pictures in there. The idea is that if you suffer a fire or a theft or something else that causes you to lose those items, you can then go back and account for them, either with your insurance agency or to the police department, so that we can go recover those items once they're sold or recovered.
So I'm going to go back a little bit as somebody, and if any of our viewers are like me and ever used a rotary phone, and you go back a ways, you know, back when I started in law enforcement, we used to have something called Operation ID, and we would give people a little etching pen, a little motorized etching pen, and then we would give them what was called their Operation ID number, which was the police department's identifier, and then a sort of a separate number that was specific to that department. And we would ask people to go and etch all of their valuable stuff, and they would put it on their TV and their VCR, their Betamax and their cameras and those kind of things. And it was a whole lot of work. And then we would say, write down all the serial numbers and keep them in a safe place. And then if something was stolen, then it was etched. So in other words, there was an identifier on that piece of property that would show it was taken from a particular place. But it really required a tremendous amount of record keeping on the part of the resident or the property owner. And frankly, it wasn't that effective. I mean, it really was dependent on, we had to find that piece of property wherever it may be, and it potentially could get tracked back to where it started. Obviously, with the change in technology, it's a whole lot better than it used to be. And what you're saying is, first of all, in this state, and it's a great law, by the way, all pawn shops are required This is not voluntary. They are required to put everything that they bring in into this database that is accessible to law enforcement.
Correct.
A lot of people don't know that. So if somebody goes in and pawns something, and it's sort of the obvious outlet for stolen property, and people think pawn shops, that burglars and people take that to pawn shops. Now, it does occasionally happen, but this is the big safeguard against that. So the pawn shop has to put the property into the database, which is accessible to you and law enforcement. And this is sort of taking that good idea, that good database, and sort of maximizing the access for people. So I could, if I'm hearing you correctly, I could go and take all of my valuable property, whether it be a photograph or a serial number, and put it into that database today, so that I don't have to keep that record otherwise. And if something does happen and I lose my property, it can immediately be entered into the system. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. You're not actually putting it into the database that the police have access to. We aren't able to look at your property or to access your property. That's held specifically by you. That's your own private, as it were, database that you would maintain. And you'd, as you trade things or get rid of them or sell things or acquire new things, you'd maintain that. The idea is when you suffer that catastrophic loss, either through a theft or through an accident or a fire.
Anything, right.
You're able then to go back and print off a report online that's accessed again from anywhere. It doesn't have to be from your computer or from your home. And the nice thing is, like you had referenced the old program where you were asked to keep that list in a safe place, and oftentimes people would keep it in their safe, which then was stolen,
or a drawer,
and then they wouldn't have that available. So the nice thing about this program is that it's accessible from anywhere.
And people are always concerned about privacy, as they should be. This is not a government database. It is not maintained by us.
Correct.
It is a private company.
Yes.
And again, if somebody accesses this, first of all, it's completely free.
Yes.
It is their own database with their own access and password that is kept with a private company, not with government, correct?
Correct.
And it is not put into any kind of database that is accessible unless they choose to put it in.
Yes.
And that's their choice, is that correct?
Right.
Right. So in other words, nobody in government, nobody in law enforcement has access to what kind of stuff you have and what property you've put into this database. You are completely it is the individual resident's discretion as far as who has access to that and what they do with it.
Correct.
Is that correct? So really the best of both worlds. It's easy to use. It's going to be very, very helpful to us if a person suffers that loss. And it's really controlled, and the access is restricted really only to the private citizen in a private database run by a private company and not government or law enforcement. So again, really no downsides to using this.
Right. One of the neat things about this too is probably the biggest item that we see these days being sold in pawn shops is jewelry. And jewelry, as anybody notices that has jewelry, isn't tracked by serial number. You don't have a serial number on your grandmother's ring. And so it's very hard for us to know that the ring that's been sold 2 days later was the one that was taken in your burglary. You can describe it for us, but your description may not match the description that the pawn shop gives. And the nice thing about Report It is you can include photos. So we no longer have to rely on your description of a 2.3 carat ring with a gold band. We can actually look at it and see that there's descriptors on there or specific markings that we can hand those photos then to our local pawn shops and say, keep your eye out for this ring. And we've had some success with that.
So speaking of success, are there any specific incidents, whether with our department or other departments, that you can point to where this, somebody has made this decision to use this database and it's been effective?
Correct. Yeah. We again with we're just now coming on board with the Report It system. We've been using Leads Online for a period of time, and we've seen some really neat successes with Leads Online. We had a gentleman in the east side who was in we've had a gentleman on the east side who is in a home for retired persons, and he had his wedding ring stolen from his nightstand by one of the folks that works there. And we were able to recover that ring because of Leads Online. We were able to enter in the descriptors as well as some other information we knew about the person that had probably taken it. And in conjunction with that, we were able to solve 4 other burglaries at the same time.
Nice.
So lots of time, just like you referenced, the folks that are responsible for one of these things are responsible for
Right.
10s or 20s or 30s of these.
Right. And, you know, I've always been amazed when I've taken burglary reports in my career where people will always assume, well, I'm sure it's all gone, it'll never get recovered, nothing ever gets recovered. Actually, it does. I mean, property does get recovered, and part of it is this sort of technology that we can access and we can use. And there are a lot of success stories. And so taking the time to write all this down, to record it, it doesn't take a ton of time. I mean, if you sit down, you should be able to do this in a reasonable amount of time. It's when you want to do it. You don't have to make an appointment. And again, it's completely free. So a great tool that we're now expanding so people have private access to their own accounts. So how do people do it? What website do they go to, and can they do it right now?
They can.
Okay.
It's absolutely free. You don't have to live within city limits or in any specific jurisdiction. You don't have to have a code or anything else to enter. The website is reportit, all one word, REPORTIT, .leadsonline.com. And if you just search for Report It, all one word, it'll come up as your first hit. And it'll walk you right through it, ask you to create your own password and username, because again, this is your database that you're maintaining. The police have nothing to do with accessing it unless you turn that over to us because you've been the victim of a crime.
And again, that's going to be your decision in any case. And it's going to be based upon what what you want to do at that time. And just to repeat what Marty just said, because it's important, is yes, this is certainly accessible to Bremerton residents. It's something that we are involved with, but you don't have to live just in the city limits of Bremerton. If you live outside of the city of Bremerton, it's available to anyone, and other law enforcement agencies may choose to access it as well, depending on their own policies. So a good idea no matter where you live. If people have any specific questions, you can check the Leads Online website. You can give a call to Detective Garland. And again, it's just another way that we're trying to serve you even better and to keep crime down and to get that property recovered. Detective Garland has been with our department for many years, a top-notch detective as part of our detective team. I'm a little biased, that is really, really good. I am a resident of the city of Bremerton. I'm glad I have folks like this looking out for me as well. And thank you for your work, and thanks for being with us, Marty.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back after this. Well, as we head into the second half of the show, we'll talk a little bit about some numbers and statistics from the last month for which we have statistics, which is January of 2015, and also a couple of notable events around our department. First of all, I should mention that in February, that marked the retirement of a 28-year officer and detective from our agency, Robbie Davis. A lot of people know Robbie from around town. His family is very involved in Lions. He's been involved just in the community for so many years. Has been a really outstanding officer for us, again, for decades. And he retired just a month ago, and we recognized him at the council meeting in February as well. At the same meeting, we also swore in our newest officer, administered the oath of office to Officer Michelle Graceheimer. Officer Graceheimer, and you see her here being sworn in, and along with the council, is a veteran officer, and she's what we call a lateral officer, as opposed to a brand new officer that just got out of the academy that doesn't have any experience. A lateral officer coming laterally from another department. She comes to us from the Chandler, Arizona Police Department, and again, Michelle has got many years of police service and a very respected and experienced officer, and we're very, very fortunate that she chose to join the Bremerton Police Department. The last several of our newer hires are lateral hires, experienced officers who are choosing to continue their career here with Bremerton. And we're getting some very, very good people. And I can tell you as the chief, that makes things easier both for the community and for our department, because their length of training is obviously much shorter. They're on the road and they're providing service that much quicker. And they're also bringing in, really a good positive culture so that we're learning from other departments as well. So again, welcome to Officer Michelle Graceheimer, and you will see her around town on patrol. Let's take a look at a couple numbers as we usually do. We're going to change it a little bit and actually look at the last 3 years as opposed to just the last 2 years for the month of January. So let's start with reports. If you watch the show regularly, or if you watch our council presentations, we used to be well over 1,000 reports every single month without fail. That went under 1,000 for most of 2014, and it continues to decline in 2015. that is generally speaking a good thing. A report does not mean a crime. It just means something that we took a report on. So it could be a contact with a citizen. It can be a traffic ticket. It can be a criminal case or a crime. It can also be something like a mental health or service call. So fewer of them, by and large, is a good thing. It's again, not a perfect analog, but it's generally a good thing. And we're continuing to see those go down. We're also seeing arrests go down. Again, that is generally a good thing. We have been focusing on frequent flyers, those chronic and frequent users of the system that we have so many contacts with. A lot of times it's people that are committing a lot of property crimes. A lot of times it's what I would call criminal vagrants, people that are sort of living their lifestyle, stealing things, drinking alcohol, using drugs. We have really been focusing on that. So those arrests have been trending downward. So again, generally a good thing. Domestic violence has been relatively consistent in the 20s during the month of January for all 3 years. DUIs, you can see, went down to just 4 in January of 2015. That's a factor of a couple things. First of all, we did not do any emphasis patrols other than New Year's Eve in January 2015. We don't have as large a traffic division as we did in past years because of just staffing changes and cuts. And then I would also mention, to be honest with you, that DUI laws have become much more complex over the last few years, and it's made it much more difficult to prosecute DUI cases. And that's a difference that we've seen, and that's been driven by the courts, by the legislature, and that's not a good change, and it's something that we would like to see begin to move in the other direction. Mothers Against Drunk Driving and a lot of other groups, Target Zero, will be working on that. And you can see mental health calls actually just the same as last year, 19 during the month of January. Let's talk about frequent flyer focus areas. Again, chronic, frequent offenders who are what I would call prolific offenders, breaking into sheds, breaking into cars, taking money out of parking meters. I mean, it's that kind of thing, are these frequent flyers that we focus on. If you go to our website, you can see the high 5 each month that we're sort of targeting, the people that have arrest warrants that are frequent flyers. And these are the crimes that we associate with them. You can see that trespass was up just a little bit over last year. Thefts were down considerably. That's a good sign. Vehicle theft up just a little bit from last year. This one I don't like to see, which is residential burglary, well down from 2 years ago, but actually up a little bit from last year. Vehicle prowling, just about the same, and you can see shoplifting up a little bit. I've talked about this the last couple of months. Our shoplifting cases are being centered out of a couple of specific stores, and it's generally centered around liquor, alcohol that people are stealing, and we are working with those stores to sort of harden the target and make it harder to shoplift from those particular stores. But the increase in shoplifting alcohol has been one of the unintended outcomes of privatization of alcohol, and we're seeing more of it. And then you can see escape from the Department of Corrections. That doesn't mean escape from prison. It means a Department of Corrections a person who is being supervised by the Department of Corrections. This usually means after prison, didn't keep up with their requirements with their corrections officer, and or they failed to appear or go to court. You can see that we had 16 of those in the month of January, and contempt of court is that bottom number there, which means doing something not in accordance with court orders, either the municipal or the district court. You can see we had 41 of those. I'm going to talk about a specific case in regard to that kind of person that we're dealing with that are under the supervision of the Department of Corrections. We're talking about the State Department of Corrections. When a person gets out of prison, they are under supervision for some period of time, and they have to follow certain guidelines and rules. So we had a use of a stolen debit card. Somebody had their debit card stolen in a theft, and it was used at a local convenience store. And you can see on this slide in the lower right there is a screenshot of the security camera of that person using the stolen debit card. This was given out to our officers at briefing, and all of our officers looked at that surveillance screenshot. And one of our officers said, "I think I know that woman." He went through social media, Facebook pages, Twitter. We do this a lot. All agencies do. It's all publicly accessible. And he did locate who that person was, determined what her name was, and subsequently arrested her. He also learned through social media the joyous news that she had just recently been engaged to her boyfriend, who, by the way, was also under DOC supervision and also had a warrant for his arrest. So he was also arrested when he went to locate her. The two of them were subsequently separated in jail, and apparently their wedding will be delayed. The point of this story is we are seeing a lot of people on DOC supervision. We get a lot of individuals under supervision in this area and in this community because we have transit, because we have social services, because it's just sort of the urban center of this area. So it's something we pay attention to. We work with the Department of Corrections. And I would mention this, as the legislature talks about changing the criminal justice system and maybe having more people on supervision and fewer people in prison, one of those outcomes is this. And having a lot of people basically flagrantly violating the conditions of their supervision is something that we're seeing more and more of. So in the interest of cost saving, the state may be looking at closing more prisons and putting more people out there under supervision. We're going to see the effects of that in communities, including Bremerton, if that's what they do. I'm going to talk about landlord notification for a second. This was something that's been in place for a while, actually, I think since the mid-2000s, around 2005 or 6. And it just means that if a person is a landlord, they have property in the city of Bremerton, we notify the landlord if there are incidents involving us with their renters. So they know what's going on and they can really take an active role in keeping that a good, safe place to be. And as of February 18th of 2015, we hit a milestone, 20,000 notifications over the last roughly 10 years. We now have 762 participants at over 9,200 residences in our city, and that's pretty much the huge lion's share of rental properties in the city of Bremerton. A very good program that's been very, very effective for us. Very different subject I want to talk about, and something that some people don't know a lot about. We get regular calls, I guess I would say, on an individual who walks around the West Bremerton area, specifically around Olympic College area, sort of that 11th and Warren area in Bremerton, and you'll see him. I think he's in his 30s or 40s, and he will have a rifle slung over his shoulder, and he walks around on the sidewalk. And we get a phone call, and people will say, there's a guy with a rifle walking around on the sidewalk. We're happy to take the call. I'm not saying people shouldn't call, but it is legal. That is legal in the state of Washington. It is one of the outcomes of our very, it's a very permissive open carry law in this state. If a person wants to carry a firearm, including a rifle or a handgun, if it is, as long as it is visible and exposed, they can go most places. They can certainly go around in the public. They can go to most areas where there are people. There are certain areas that can say that they can't come on that property. For example, Olympic College. They do restrict firearms on their property. Certainly the high school, public schools, certain private businesses. A private business can pretty much restrict anything they want to. But in any public area, it is generally permitted. People who can't carry firearms would be felons who've had that civil right taken away from them as a result of their conviction. Certain juveniles, depending on the circumstances, people under 18, but again, not all circumstances. You'd have to look at the law. It's a little bit complex. And then the one thing that is illegal is what's called brandishing of firearms, which basically means presenting it or pointing it in a way that would cause somebody to be alarmed. So in other words, if somebody is carrying it around this way instead of strapped to their back like this person does, that could conceivably be a violation, but it would be up to law enforcement to try to prove that in court. If somebody obviously pointed it at someone, that's brandishing, and that would obviously be a crime and a very serious crime. But again, carrying a firearm in public is legal in this state. Now, if you see that and you're concerned, it doesn't mean you shouldn't call. Certainly, we're happy to hear about it. We're happy to check on it. But as a matter of course, we do not generally stop anyone who's carrying a firearm that is clearly visible, because it is, again, legal in this state. Speaking of felons, let's talk a little bit about a guy named Daniel Lang and a person named Brent Weir. You see their photos here. Very, very serious crime that occurred, I believe, in the month of January. Gentleman going to work early in the morning, I think it was 5 or 6 in the morning a.m., was going out to his car in his apartment complex, and he actually gets carjacked by these two people along with a third person. Very, very rare in our area, in our city. That is a serious, serious crime. They put a gun in his face and took his car. Fortunately, nobody hurt, but a very violent crime. They took that car. It was reported to us and to our dispatch center. The Washington State Patrol actually located the car that had just been stolen minutes earlier over near Auto Center Way and Loxie Egan's. They got into a pursuit. One person jumped out, and the state trooper took that person into custody. These two continued on, and the trooper didn't continue to pursue them. But we did determine who they were based on a lot of different evidence. We went through Washington's Most Wanted on Q13, and they received some publicity there. We put it out in local media as well, and they have both been apprehended or captured. They are both in jail on a very high bail, and they're both being charged with serious felony crimes. They were both located, by the way, in Port Orchard in 2 separate cases, both of which again involved pursuit and fleeing from police. So dangerous, dangerous people. They will be going probably, again, I don't think that they've gone to trial yet, but they've got a good head start on their neck tattoos if they go to prison. Let's talk about a separate case that is in a way kind of funny, but in a way really kind of tragic and kind of sad, and it makes you say, why does this keep happening? February 15th, we had a strange case in the city of Bremerton on Kitsap Way. An officer pulls over an RV. It's an old 1970s era RV, and it has expired tabs. So he pulls it over because it has expired tabs. And the man won't roll the window down, and he's sort of acting in a strange way with the officer. The officer has a hard time identifying who he is. And long story short, the officer finds out that this person has 2 arrest warrants from Snohomish County or Skagit County, one I think for DUI. And he goes up to inform this person that he has an arrest warrant for his arrest from the court. The person rolls the window up and will not come out of the RV. Officers surrounded this. Other officers came out to help, and over a course of about 90 minutes, they tried to talk this person out, tell him that he needed to come out because there was a court order for his arrest. He continued to not cooperate. He wouldn't come out. There's basically this long standoff, and they showed a tremendous amount of patience and really good judgment. I mean, they didn't force the issue. They gave him every chance. They negotiated for a very long time, and eventually made the decision, again, after a very, for literally hours, blocking up traffic on Kitsap Way, to put a gas grenade in the back window to get him out of that vehicle. There was a knife on the dashboard, but officers didn't overreact to it. They didn't perceive it as something he was necessarily going to grab and assault anyone with. So they did put a gas grenade. It's oleocapsicum. It's just sort of that stuff that people spray like mace into the back of that, and he couldn't get out of that RV quickly enough and was quickly taken into custody by officers. He was singing "Let It Be" by the Beatles when they took him into custody, and off he went to jail. We took the RV, impounded it. So, end of the story, sort of, but the backstory is this. This is the 4th time in less than a year that this individual, who clearly suffers from mental health issues, clearly, has caused a large-scale police incident that involved a standoff, a dozen or more officers, whether or not to use of force, and making just a giant incident that really disrupted the public. In April and May of just last year in Seattle, he had 3 separate incidents, 2 at the Coleman Ferry Dock, and you might remember this from the news. He drove around in an old Volkswagen pickup, towing a little trailer in circles at a slow speed in the ferry dock, in the lineup area. All the ferries had to be canceled, and basically the State Patrol just stood off to the side and watched him because he was just going in circles. They didn't want to force the issue and cause more danger. So he drove around for, I think, 4 hours, finally stopped. They took him into custody, and off he went. Just a few weeks later, he did the exact same thing with the same vehicle. And again, the same outcome, hours and hours of delay, ferries were canceled. And in between, he went to the University of Washington, got into a barricaded suspect and hostage incident with the University of Washington police on the campus of UW with the same vehicle and the same RV. Well, this year, different RV, different city, came across the water somehow, and hours and hours again of a police incident. And the question is, why is this guy out? Why are we continuing to have to deal with people with these very significant mental health issues causing massive disruption to the public and what could be very, very dangerous? I mean, every time you hear about these very serious use of force incidents that people want to talk about involving law enforcement, it's often involving people with mental health issues. And I think the question we also have to ask is, why are these individuals continuing to float around causing problems? And how do we really start to build a system that can deal more effectively with it? Don't have all the answers, but it's certainly a question that we want to ask. And finally, on a much better note, in January 2015, we made a contribution as a department to St. Jude's Children's Hospital, and $340 was the total donation. We call it the Fuzz Fund. If you see our officers, you'll notice that some of them have goatees or beards. We don't normally allow that by policy, but we do if they contribute every single month to what we call the Fuzz Fund. And then one of those officers, and it rotates among those who contribute, get to choose each month who to donate to. And so for January 2015, Officer John Van Sanford had a relative who received excellent treatment at St. Jude's, and he chose to contribute the January Fuzz Fund to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. And we'll keep you up to date on where that's going each month, because every one of them is a great cause and something we're really interested in doing. So lots of things going on around the Bremerton Police Department, things that we like to bring to you and let you know what's going on. And thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time on BPD Update.